Hello, welcome to the Maya Toolbelt. This is Michael. Today we're going to talk about creating particles, but specifically we're going to be talking about the emitting of particles. So in the pull down menu up here, we're going to go to the Dynamics module, and then Particles, Create Emitter. And let's look in the options here. You'll see that there is a lot of stuff in here. Let me just close some of these categories just to... There we go. So we have basic emitter attributes, distance/direction attributes, basic emission speed attributes. Then we have volume emitter attributes and volume speed attributes. Now you'll notice here that this at the top of the option box in my scene where we have emitter options with the word create in parentheses. I have a little bit of an older version of Maya. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that newer versions or more up-to-date versions have combined the create emitter options with the emit from object options. So if we look at those real quick, we'll see pretty much the same options. It's just a little bit different for emitter type. So they have the same categories here: basic emitter attributes, distance direction, basic emission speed, volume emitter, volume speed, and up here it says emitter options with emit from object in parentheses. We're going to try and go over both of these categories from my older version of Maya, and with those of you who have the more up-to-date version will hopefully be able to follow along with me. So first, let's go back to the simple create emitter options. An emitter is literally a node in Maya that will emit particles. And particles can come in all sorts of shapes and flavors, but we're going to be mainly looking at the emitter itself, and we'll focus on the particles later. So let's just keep all our options at the default values and hit create. So in order to see the particles, right now I have the emitter here, which is this little thing in the middle of my scene. Might be a little small in the YouTube video. But in order to actually see the particles, you have to actually play the scene, like play an animation, and allow the particles to actually emit. So I'm going to go to Display, UI Elements, and I'm going to break off this menu. I'm going to unhide my time slider and range slider. And this is my animation playback controls down here at the bottom. And over here in the far right of the range slider bar, this little white box, this is the animation preferences. I'm going to click that, and this simply is a shortcut to the preferences window and straight to the time slider section of the preferences. You can also find this under Window, Settings, Preferences, and this takes you to the more generic start of the categories, the interface category. Then you have to click down here under Time Slider. So your settings might be different than mine, but what you mainly need to have is playback speed, is play every frame. And the reason why is if it's trying to be real time or some other FPS setting, your time is traveling faster than Maya can generate the particles. So it can get to some pretty finicky playback for the particles. So if you say playback speed is play every frame, time will actually slow down based on how fast Maya is spitting particles out. Because if you have 1 million particles in your scene, Maya is going to need more power to generate all these particles and maintain them. And so your computer will slow down based on how fast your computer is. You know, some people's computers can handle more than others. And so if you have play every frame for your playback speed, every frame will be played. It may just not be in real time, but every frame will get played. It will generate the particles and we can see them properly. So with play every frame selected for playback speed, I'm going to hit save. Okay. And now I'm going to hide the grid, just so I just have my emitter in the middle of my scene. I'm going to also increase the number of frames on my time slider here. So right now it goes from frame 1 to frame 24, and that's like 1 second of time. So for this number 24 right here, I'm going to increase that to say like 1,000 and enter. So now we have 1,000 frames in our time slider here. And if I just scrub through here, you'll see that the particles kind of come out in weird ways. So you can't really scrub it so much, not at least not by default. So I'm going to hit this button here, which is to go back to first frame, and now hit play. So now my particles are coming out, and hopefully recording this will not mess up my particle generation and stuff, so you can see what's going on. So by default, the type of particle that an emitter spits out are called points, which are these little dots. I'm going to hit stop now and kind of rotate my scene around, and you see these are all particles out in space. But because, you know, I'm working on YouTube and little pixels might be a little difficult to see, I'm going to select the particle now. You can see they all turn green, like they highlight because they're selected. Control A to go into their attributes. I'm going to click on the particle shape tab. Let's go down here and change the type of particle. So you have render attributes. Particle render type is points. So I'm going to change this. Instead of points, let's do spheres. So now that I have spheres selected for my particle render type, we can click the current render type button, and it gives us a radius slider, which I can decrease. There we go. So that was a little bit easier to see, maybe. I'm going to hit 5 for shaded view, so now they all look like little balls. Control A to close my attributes. So there we have a ton of particles, and this video might be really hard to see, I don't know, but hopefully it will work out. I'm going to rewind back to the first frame, all my particles go away, and hit play again. So now you can see them all coming out. Actually, I'll change my background color too, that might help. Let's try black, see what that looks like. Okay, so now my little spheres are all spitting out of my emitter. And this is with default emitter settings. I'll hit stop right there so it's not a huge cloud. But you see it's kind of emitting out in all directions in kind of a spherical shape. Okay, so I'm going to open my outliner now. Go to Window, Outliner. I have a little button here that I use. And you see I have 2 particles in my scene somehow. Let me delete that first one. Emitter 1 and then particle 2. That's all I wanted. And we'll just change the name to particle 2 to particle 1 just to keep, if anybody's following along, we can kind of stay the same. So emitter 1, emitter is the actual object emitting particles, and particle 1 is the actual particle. So if I select my emitter, hit Control A for the attributes, and scroll down, we have a lot of the same settings in the attributes as we had from the options when we were creating the emitter to begin with. You see here we have basic emitter attributes, distance/direction attributes, basic emission speed attributes, and so on. If I go to particles, create emitter options, we have the same settings. So I think the easiest way to see them all is to have an emitter in your scene already created and then changing the options and watching how the scene changes based on the options changing. I'm just going to close the outliner so I have a little bit more screen space over here. So first thing we're going to look at, we don't worry about transform attributes. That's a more basic attribute for everything. We're looking at emitter attributes only. And that's basic emitter attributes is the first thing we're going to touch on. And the emitter type. We have these different settings here. Emitter type is omnidirectional, which means all directions. Then the rate is the particles per second. Right now the default value is 100 per second. And we'll get to these other options later. Cycle emission and so on. We're not going to worry about that right now. We're just going to look at the things that are affecting what we have in our scene right now. If I open the distance/direction attributes, you'll see we have 0 for min and max distance. But basic emission speeds, we have speed is 1 and speed randomness is 0, so they're all at the same speed. And a lot of these other attributes are all grayed out because they require certain other attributes to be used for them to be opened up. So with scale rate by speed, you see here is a checkbox you can enable. What this does is it will multiply the rate by the speed. And down here speed is 1. So our rate is 100. So So we check this box on, nothing will change because it's 100 multiplied by 1. If we increase our speed, the rate will also increase based on that multiplier. So if our speed is, say, 2, then our rate value will not change, but because the scale rate by speed is checked, that multiply will happen in the scene. Let's rewind this and hit play. And you see they come out a lot faster because they're speedy, and it also increases the rate. If you ever want to see how many particles are in your scene, if you select the particle themselves and go to the particle shape tab here, you see count. So right now I have 1,649 particles. Go back to my emitter and decrease this speed, and you can see right now we're on frame about 200 almost. Take it back down to 1. Rewind, hit play. Right on top. And now we have 829 particles. So you can see it kind of doubled approximately the number of particles in the scene based on scaling the rate by the speed. If we uncheck this and again increase our speed to 2, hit play, and okay, we're there at 200 again. We see we still have 824, the same number as if the speed was 1. So by checking that scale rate by speed, we double, or actually we multiply the number of particles in the scene based on the speed value and the rate value. So with this checked, again, rate will increase based on a speed multiplier. So the speed of 2 will multiply the rate by 2, and so on. Now we have distance / direction, and the only two that are available by default are min distance and max distance. And right now they're 0. So with values of 0 for the min distance and max distance, and I'm going to change the speed to 0 also, we're going to get particles only being emitted from the emitter's current position. If we rewind, hit play here, you see all I get is this little cluster of particles right here at the center. They're not moving because speed is 0. So if I increase my min distance to say 5, and my max distance to 5.1, say, because I want them to all be like in a line around the sphere. I'm going to increase my rate, so we have a whole bunch of them, say 500 for the rate. Rewind the first frame, hit play. So now you see I have this great big ball of particles being created. Hit stop. Let's see if I zoom in here. I'm going to deselect the particles so we can see better. I'm going to zoom through the wall of particles. So now you see I'm in this big hollow. This might be hard to see in the YouTube video, perhaps. But all the particles emitted 5 units away from the emitter and just stuck there in a big kind of ball around the emitter. So that distance attribute, let me select my emitter again. Control 8, open the attributes again. There we go. So that min distance is a distance away from the emitter, the minimum distance away from the emitter that the particles will emit from, and then a max distance is how far out beyond that the particles can emit from. And because it's from 5 to 5.1, they're all kind of in the same distance, all in a shell around the emitter. If I change these values to say between 1 and 10, we're going to get a much broader spectrum or much broader range of where these particles can come from. So by putting these values back to 0 and increasing my speed, let's say to 3, then they're going to all emit from that one point. Instead of being emitted around the emitter, they're going to emit from the emitter. Hit play, and they all come from the emitter like this, like before. So that's using a distance, and we have other distances or directions and spread and so on. These are all grayed out because of our emitter type is omni, which means in all directions. So if we're going in all directions, we don't need to specify a direction. Once we change our emitter type, more of these grayed out options will become available. Speed, we've kind of already touched on. The speed is actually how fast the particles are emitting from the emitter. and then we have a speed randomness. So right now speed is set to 3. Let me rewind this and put it back to 1, which is our default speed. But then speed random, we can add, say, another, let's say, I don't know, 0.5. So what this means is that our particles will emit at a speed anywhere between 0.5 and 1.5. So our basic speed plus or minus our randomness. So we have a range of speed as opposed to one constant speed. So then we have volume emitter attributes and volume speed attributes. What we would need to have these options available is to actually have a volume emitter, which we'll be going over later. And then texture emission we'll probably not touch on for this video, since that's a bit more of a texturing based thing. Let's go back up to the top, and we can change our emitter type from omni. Let's go to directional. So with directional turned on, everything else has kind of remained the same. But now we have in our distance/direction attributes, all these options that were grayed out are now available. So by default, with a directional emitter, direction X is 1, direction Y and Z are 0, and spread is 0. So what we'll get if I hit play is a stream of particles all shooting out in the positive X direction. And that's from our direction X being a positive 1. If we did negative 1, hit enter, rewind and play, and the particles will shoot out in the opposite direction. Oh, and here's a good example of the speed randomness, by the way. You see how our stream of particles is not just a constant gap between each particle. You can see these little shadowy lines. That's the speed randomness taking effect. So some are faster than others, so some of these particles are spread out further apart than others. So that's a good way of showing that randomness in effect. Let's take the speed back to 1 and randomness to 0. Rewind and play, and you'll see it's a much more steady line of particles being shot out of the emitter. Alright, back to direction. Direction X, -1, let's take this back to 1. Y, 0, Z is 0. So if you want them to go up, then direction X should be 0, and direction Y should be 1. Rewind play, and you'll see now they shoot up in the Y axis. Spread is the next attribute, and that will spread out these particles instead of being in a straight line, which is kind of useless in most scenarios. You can kind of spread them out like a shotgun spread. And this is a slider from 0 to 1, where 1 is a 180-degree spread, and 0 is obviously a 0-degree spread. So if you want 90 degrees, you're going to need a spread value of 0.5. If you want 45 degrees, you'd have a spread value of 0.25. So let's go ahead and change it to 0.25, rewind our scene and hit play, and you'll see how the spread value affected our particle emission. Instead of just being a straight line of particles shooting up in the y-axis, we now have a 45-degree cone of particles being shot up in the y-axis. If I rewind and hit play again and change this spread attribute as it's playing, you can see the difference. Up here, all the way to 1. So now we have a 180-degree arc around this emitter, or dome I should say. So they're not going down below the y-axis, they're not going negative y at all. They're just shooting out in all directions in kind of a hemisphere shape with a 180-degree spread. It takes it down to 0.5 for a 90-degree spread, like so. This is a 90-degree angle here. And if you want 45 degrees, 0.25, rewind, play. Now this is a 45-degree angle. And that's using the spread attribute. So you can kind of see, you might be starting to see more application for particles. I mean, if you want like a smokestack coming up off a chimney, you might use a directional particle with a little bit of spread, and then we can add in some more stuff to make it more random with other types of fields and such that we'll talk about in other videos. But we have our direction and spread. Let's go back up here to the emitter type and change to, let's do surface. Now surface emitters require an object to be emitted from. So I'm actually going to delete my emitter and particle from my outliner. Just select them both, hit delete. Let's create a NURB sphere just to have something to emit from. There we go. So I have this sphere. I'm going to have it selected and go to Particles, Emit from Object, Options. Now one thing we haven't looked at, which is in these options here, is the emitter name. This simply lets you name the emitter. Instead of the basic emitter1 name that Maya gives things by default, you can choose a name. So if we say sphere emitter for the emitter name, and for emitter type, and this is still emitting from an object, but you can say omni or directional as well, and it will use the object as the emitter. So let's do that first. We're going to go back to omni and keep all our other values the same and create. So now if we rewind and play, we'll get points again because we need to, this is a new particle object that we need to change to our spheres. So now with this sphere as the emitter, and hit play, you'll see what happens is that the emission comes from the sphere itself and not from a one point. However, if I hit play and stop real quick, if I can fast enough, you can actually see there's little clusters of particles being emitted around the sphere. You kind of see that they're like a cluster right here, there's a cluster right here, cluster right here. They're all kind of emitting from these little cluster points. And what they're actually emitting from are the CVs of the NURB sphere. You see each CV of the sphere is acting as an omni emitter, each point on the sphere's surface. And that's because we chose an omni emitter for the emitter type. And emitter type is omni. If we choose directional, and our direction value by default is 1 in the X direction, rewind, play, you can see really easily how each point is spitting out particles in the X direction from the sphere. So it works the same way. If we increase our spread to 0.25, then each point on the sphere will have a little emitter, like so. You change the direction from X to, say, Y axis, play, you see that will start shooting up. So each CV of the sphere is acting as an emitter with these options. Let's rewind, go back to our emitter type, and instead of omni or directional, let's go to surface now. Rewind, play, and now it's acting probably as you might have expected to begin with, where the actual surface is acting as an emitter as opposed to the points on the surface. You'll see also that we have some more options open up for us now that we're using a surface emitter type. We have scale rate by object size and need parent UV, which is for NURBS and poly surfaces only. And we have tangent speed and normal speed right here under our speed attributes. So scale rate by object size. With this checkbox checked, what it will do is it will multiply the rate by the actual object scale that you're using. And it goes by per centimeter area. And turn that on. And I'm going to, let's see, I'm on frame 37 right now. If I select my particle and look at the count, I have 149 around frame 37. So if now that I have that checked, hit play and go to frame 37, and now I have like 2,000 because my sphere's scale has affected it. If I scale my sphere down, rewind and play, and I'm at frame 40 or so, and now I have, let's go back to my count, 134. So the object scale can really affect that rate drastically based on how large your objects are. Let's go back to the emitter, and that's with scale rate by object size. Let's uncheck that for now. Then I have need parent UV. With this checked on, this actually should be turned on before you create the emitter. And what it would do, I guess we could do that real quick. Let's delete the emitter and particles, keep the sphere, select my sphere again, go to particles, emit from object, options. We're going to choose a surface emitter type, and then turn on need parent UV and hit create. I'm going to choose my particle and again change it to spheres. Okay, so now what I've done is I select my sphere, my particle spheres, and go to the particle shape and scroll all the way down to the bottom. You'll see I have these per particle array attributes, and we're not going to talk about these for this video, but what the checkbox for need parent UV, with that turned on, it added the parent U and parent V attributes to the particles themselves. And what this essentially does is it allows you to use attributes of the particles to then drive other changes, which we're not going to get into for this video. But using the parent U and parent V attributes, you can then change, for example, color or opacity or so on based on the UV values. Let's go back to the emitter. And that's the need parent UV. It's checked on since we turned it on when we created the emitter. So we'll just leave it on for now. Then we have tangent speed and normal speed. So I'm going to rewind the scene, go back to frame 1, and for tangent speed it's set to 0 by default, and then normal speed is set to 1. Let's see, that's the best way of demonstrating this. So normal speed is 1, speed is also 1. If we rewind this and play, you see it's normal emission rate as you'd expect. If I choose my normal speed to be 0, rewind, hit play, you'll see they're not moving at all. So whenever you're using a surface emitter, it doesn't really pay attention to the speed anymore. It just looks at the normal speed and tangent speed values. So the normal speed of 2, rewind and play, they shoot out much faster. Let's try a tangent speed of 1 and put normal down to 0. See what happens. Okay, so now what that's going on is the tangent of the sphere is affecting the speed. If I delete my NURB sphere, delete it, my particle's still in the scene, that's okay. I'm going to create a NURBS plane. Alright, and I will go to particles, emit from object, we're going to use surface still, and create. I'm going to delete particle 2, which is the new particle that just got made. I want to use my old particle. So that brings up a good point. How do you use a particle you've already made, you like how it looks? I like my little spheres, for example. I don't want to have to keep changing the scale of spheres every time I make a new particle emitter. I have my old particle here. I'm going to go to Window, Relationship Editors, Dynamic Relationships. So over here on the left, I have my outliner. You can see I have my emitter here selected. Particle 1 selected. Over here on the right, I have selection modes. Turn on emitters. So for particle 1, if I choose emitter 1 in the selection mode, minimize this now, hit play. Now my old particle is being emitted from my new emitter. And that's using the dynamic relationship editor. You select the particle and choose which emitter in your scene you want that particle to come from, and it will now do that. Close that. So rewinding and playing here. Now we're seeing this result emitting from the square or the plane. Let's go back to the emitters attributes here. And this is using a normal speed of 1, tangent speed of 0. Let's choose a normal speed of -1. rewind and play, you'll see them go down, which, you know, that makes sense. It's using the normal direction to choose whether it goes up or down, but it's based on normal the positive or negative values. So with a tangent speed of 1 and a normal speed of, say, 0, let's see what we get. So now you see they're kind of going out in different directions. It's based on, but they're not going up, because a plane's tangents are left and right, up and down. They're based on 2D values for a plane. And so all these emitters are emitting along the plane's tangent. Hopefully that makes a little bit more visible sense, more than a sphere anyway, since a sphere is going in all directions essentially, since it's round. A plane, you can kind of see how the particles are emitting out based on the flat plane's tangent. And increasing these values just makes the speed faster. And you also have the speed randomness still as well. You know what, this video is going pretty long. I think I'm going to make this into a part 2. So let's go ahead and stop for now. We're going to go over curve and volume emitters in part 2. Thanks for sticking around. Hope you enjoyed the video so far, and you'll come back for the next one.